we gather in search of the truth, dark, and mystery. It's the Drunk Turkey Show.
Big development today in the investigation into the murders of 4 University of Idaho students. According to state and local officials and court documents, 28-year-old Bryan Christopher Kohberger has been arrested. He was arrested and arraigned this morning in Pennsylvania.
We have new details on what Bryan Kohberger was doing right before his arrest. Police says a tactical team burst in to arrest the Idaho murder suspect. He was in pajamas and latest gloves, stuffing trash into Ziploc bags.
Hey, greetings from the year 3000. It still sucks. This is Phil J. Fry, and you're listening to the Drunken Turkey Show. Your one stop for this sort of thing. Hit that button, like and subscribe. You know what to do, just like every other podcast.
You guys know what to do, just like every other podcast. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, ring that notification bell. You guys know what to do. Welcome back to the DT Show. I'm Daniel, and today we're going back into the book, the James Patterson Idaho 4 book, and we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the revelations that are coming out. The next part that we're going to be discussing goes into who Bryan Kohberger was and is, and some very interesting things that we're going to find out today about Bryan Kohberger. Some of these things that I had known for a little bit, I kind of told you guys about before, and we'll highlight what those things are. But before we do that, we have some documents that we need to discuss in the Bryan Kohberger case. So let's do that now without further ado. So this is the state's response to the coalition of media organizations' motion to be heard as interested parties and motion to vacate the non-dissemination order or the gag order. So the defendant pleaded guilty on July 2nd, 2025, all charges in this case. At the change of plea hearing, the court asked the parties their position on whether the non-dissemination order in this case should be maintained. The state requested, and that the court granted that request for the non-dissemination order to remain in effect through the sentencing. Upon further reflection, the state withdraws this request. Now that the defendant has pleaded guilty as charged on all 5 counts of the indictment, his right to a fair trial and the issue of guilt is no longer an issue. Nevertheless, out of respect for the integrity of the judicial process and the privacy of the victims and their families, as they consider their right to provide victim impact statements at sentencing, the prosecution team does not intend to make any public statements about the case until after sentencing has concluded. I've talked with some of the victims' family members, and I know that they're in the process of writing their impact statement. And one of their issues was, or one of their complaints was, that they don't know everything that happened. And to me, it sounds like the prosecution is not going to sit with them and tell them all that they know until after sentencing. And so that, as they were writing their victim impact statements, it's been something that's been kind of difficult to do for the most part. So just kind of wanted to lead with that for this instance here. And I feel for the families. They want to know and they want answers, and not even them can get some, because mainly this non-dissemination order. But they say, hey, we're not going to talk about it, but they're going to release it. Maybe perhaps we'll get some information. Now, the defense has responded. The defense has responded, and this is the opposition to the motion of vacate non-dissemination order. And I'll go through this. So obviously, Bryan Kohberger's team has said no, even though they really didn't have a stance when the state asked for it. When the judge asked, hey, do y'all, about the non-dissemination order, the state said, yeah, we'll keep it. Defense said it had no objection. They didn't really care. But now they do. So this is and apparently this isn't out yet. So you're seeing it here first. Opposition to the motion to vacate non-dissemination order comes now. Bryan Kohberger, and through his attorneys of record, and hereby requests court for an order maintaining revised amended non-dissemination order issued for June 23rd, 2023 until sentencing. Mr. Kohberger's request regarding the order is based on, 1, the language of the order has not been previously challenged by the media, the ongoing publicity regarding the case, and threats to Mr. Kohberger's safety, and the ongoing special inquiry and the hold order for all witnesses issued by the court. So they're saying that the language that the media used when they wanted to remove this isn't correct. So whatever. The second one is because of the ongoing publicity regarding the case and Mr. Kohberger's safety. But what does that have to do with his right for a fair trial and why there's need to be a gag order? I'm sorry. I mean, there's none of that has anything to do with it, unless they're so concerned that the information that's about to come out, there's going to be some sort of uproar. Maybe they're concerned about that there might be some sort of I don't know, attack on the courthouse. I guess, you know, if you go back and watch the change of plea hearing, you can see in the courtroom there's quite a few people there. I mean, law enforcement people. They had that place locked down. There was a lot of security. You know, we talked to Alina Smith, who was there at the courtroom, and she talked about the intense security that they had to go through. So what safety, you know, threats for Mr. Kohberger? Is it coming from other inmates? Is he afraid that once they hear what he had did, that maybe they're going to attack him? But how is that going to change after sentencing? He's still going back home there, you know, until he gets, you know, removed to the maximum state prison. So interesting. So the language and the revised amended non-dissemination order issued June 23, 2023, specifically ran through sentencing. In response to the significant litigation in the Idaho Supreme Court ruling on this issue, in this case, the court issued a revised amended non-dissemination order on June 23rd. By its terms, the order was to remain in full force and effect until the conclusion of the trial and any sentencing proceedings that may follow, unless ordered by this court. After this order was issued, the interested parties, hereinafter the media, raised no further objections to the revised order. The revised order recognized that Mr. Kohberger's rights extended beyond the questioning of guilt or innocence in his right to a fair sentencing proceeding. But like, you're not tainting anybody. You know, the person that's going to be making the sentencing is the judge, and he's seen all the information. So what does keeping the information sealed, how does that infringe on a fair sentencing proceeding? I've never even heard that before. You know, I've heard of a fair trial and things of that nature. But a fair sentencing, keeping a non-dissemination order for a fair sentencing proceeding, that's, like I said, who are you trying not to taint? The judge has seen everything. He knows more about, he's been in the ex parte hearings. He's been there for everything. He knows more than the prosecution, in my opinion, in certain instances. Regarding of whether the proceeding is reached via a jury verdict or plea. The motion filed by the media is to vacate the revised order, asserts that once a guilty plea is entered, that the right to a fair trial under the Sixth Amendment is extinguished. Well, we just heard from the state, and Bill Thompson kind of feels the same way too. Like, hey, there's a plea, it's been accepted. The right for a fair trial is over. There's no point. They're not going to taint any juries. There's not going to be a juror. There's not going to be a trial for a jury. But the media fails to recognize that Mr. Kohberger retains his rights to a fair sentence proceeding guaranteed under the Fourth Amendment and his right to effective assistance of counsel under the Sixth Amendment of the Idaho Constitution. The defendant's right to effective assistance of counsel extends to all critical stages of the prosecution where his substantial rights may be affected, and sentencing is one such stage. In this case, substantial dangers of prejudice to Mr. Kohberger exists up to and through sentencing. Prejudice of what? He's admitted guilt. He's the murderer. Like, this is stupid. At this court is well aware there have been numerous leaks of confidential information of the press and an avalanche of publicity that continues with release of the Peacock documentary, The Idaho Student Murders, the Amazon Prime series on July 11, 2025, and the book by James Patterson on July 14th. Lifting the revised order now, this close to sentencing would only increase the media frenzy and the publicity around the case. So what? So what? It's not like it's going to affect a jury. This is stupid. The ongoing publicity in this case threatens Mr. Kohberger's safety. As set forth in Section 1, the amount of publicity coming before the sentencing, even with the revised order in place, is massive. Further, release would only serve to gin up the anger and the violent rhetoric already at a fever pitch. Why? Why do you think that's going to happen? Do you think that's going to happen because we're going to find out some pretty crazy stuff that we don't know about? You get what I'm saying? Like we already know a lot. A lot has come out. Everybody knows a lot about this about this case. We don't know everything. Is there a lot more to learn? Is that what this is trying to infer? Is there is a lot more to learn? Again, this court is aware of the threats posted not only to Mr. Kohberger, but his family and the court staff. So is his family going to be attending the hearing? You know, are they afraid that if they go out there and this information is released, that now something might be directed towards them? Maybe perhaps there's something more that we're going to find out that might implicate his family. I mean, Howard Bloom talks about how one of the reasons why Bryan Kohberger took the plea deal was because he didn't want to implicate his parents. Now, I don't know how true that is. To me, the guy's a psychopath. I don't think he has any feelings or cares in the world. You know, maybe perhaps he has some sort of weird affection with his mother. But outside of that, I mean, I don't know. Obviously, you know, it's just my speculation. But, you know, outside of that, based on the things that he wrote about his own father and other people and himself, you know, I think he's a psychopath. He's a sociopath. He doesn't have any feelings. He doesn't care about anybody but himself. He's a narcissist. At this point, the press has access to every witness who is not an agent of their party, as the court noted in this denial of the motion to vacate the amended non-dissemination order in 2023. The media is not restrained. Only the parties are restrained. And those restraints are reasonable. Both parties had no objection to the indeed sought out to have the... Wait, hold on. Both parties had no objection and indeed sought to have the revised order remain in place at least until sentencing. Well, that's not the case anymore. It's not the case anymore. The prosecution said no. Let it go. Mr. Kohberger requests the court deny the media request to vacate the revised order ahead of sentencing. In order to maintain the integrity of the proceeding of the process and the scrutiny of the safety and all of the parties involved, including families, courts, staff, and attorney, the revised order should remain in effect. The revised order is reasonable in scope and does not impinge on the media's ability to investigate the report on this case. Maintaining the revised order will minimize the media frenzy leading up to sentencing. I'm sorry, Ann Taylor, but what business of it yours what the media does at this point? You know, if they have a frenzy, if they want to talk about it, if they don't want to talk about it, there is absolutely no tainting of any jury that can happen at this point. The judge is the one that's going to decide the sentence. So are you afraid that he's going to watch something and that something is going to convince him of changing the sentences that's already been agreed to at the maximum level outside of death? You know, he's got 4 life sentences without the possibility of parole. And they're to run one after another. So what is he going to do? Add a 5th one? Like, what is he going to do? He's going to hear something and be like, oh my God, I didn't know about this fact, even though I've seen all the discovery. I've seen all the evidence. I've seen everything outside of how they plan to interpretate it. He's seen the ex parte meetings. He's seen behind the veil, so to speak. What is Dateline or DT Show or anybody else going to find in these non-dissemination, or that the non-dissemination order has been hiding, that all of a sudden is going to maybe change the mind of the judge, and now he's going to be like, yo, this guy, you know what? I'm going to give him death. Is that what the fear is at this point? At the end of the day, a plea has been accepted, and the terms of the plea have been accepted. I don't know. It's just stupid. It really is. Not gonna lie, it's what it is. It's stupid, and hopefully the non-dissemination order gets dropped. So we have Natalie James. Before we get into the my prediction is that it's going to be dropped on the 17th. So like, comment, subscribe, guys, because we already got those FOIAs working on a bunch of stuff. So we're going to be able to bring in a lot of that evidence to you guys of what it was, with obvious, you know, some respect to the victims and their family members. You know, if something comes out like the body cam of Officer Nunez, and, you know, I'm not going to air what he saw or any of those type of things. That's not going to come out on my channel. But you know, the other things, you know, maybe some of the things that they believe Bryan Kohberger had done, you know, if he was Papa Rogers, those type of things. Natalie James 999 BK is using this to remain relevant, torment and control. As my son would say, he's a clown trying to flex. That's interesting. You know, I actually think you're probably right there. To be 110% honest with you, I think you're right. I think you're right. That body cam won't be released. I hope not. I hope not. All righty, guys. Without further ado, let's get into the conversation of the book and who is Bryan Kohberger, because this is going to be the next point of this book is who is Bryan Kohberger. It starts off talking about 2013 in Saylorsburg, Pennsylvania. So, you know, 2013, Bryan would have been, well, he was born in what, 94. So in 04, he would have been 10. So about 19, I guess. This goes on to say, the three teenage boys are racing through the trees, pretending they're Marines. The Poconos racing around the woods with knives or guns is normal. They can lose one another for hours on end. Two of the boys don't notice exactly where the third boy, a tall kid with bulging eyes, positions himself. They don't see if he is close to the house or even inside it. The house is invisible from the road. Its owner, Mark Bayless, a former Navy SEAL, who is the father of one of the boys, bought it for precisely this reason. So what they're going to do is they're going to talk about how Bryan Kohberger would go over to the Bayless household and hang out with a couple of guys, and they would go hiding and running in the woods, and Bryan Kohberger would fall off. And what he would do, and this is kind of the start of his, like, I guess, manipulation, you know, he'd wait for Mark to leave on his four-wheeler, so to speak, and then he would break into their house and start stealing things, whether it was, you know, prescriptions, knives is one of the things that they pointed out. Another thing they pointed out was like $25,000 valued coin collection that Bryan Kohberger allegedly stole. He talks about this one scenario where he actually came back, and I guess he assumes Bryan was still in the house. And when he got there and he walked through the house, somebody bolted out the back and through the trees. But one of the things that says in here, which I found to be really crazy, is that at this point in the trees, and now this might sound very familiar, Bryan Kohberger allegedly would hide out in the trees and watch. And they found like Reese's Buttercup wrappers on the floor there that somebody was watching him. Now, there was a point where Mr. Bayless tells his kids that, hey, I'm gonna find out who's stealing my stuff, and we're gonna take care of him, so to speak. And what he goes on to say is Jack tells the third kid, whose name is Bryan, that his dad is pissed. Bryan tells Jack he reveres his father. Remember that word, reveres. I'm going to talk about it tomorrow in part 3. That's where he says, or at least what he puts in text. So this is something that they saw, like, hey, I revere your father. But what he does smacks something different than straight up hero worship. Someone starts to stalk Mark Bayless. The stalker hides in the trees, camouflage, munching on Reese's peanut butter cups, dropping the wrappers on the ground, waiting for Mark to leave on one of his orange motorbikes or his pickup truck. The stalker forces his way through an open door with a knife and heads to the bathroom where Bayless keeps his old prescription drugs. And the thief can guess where he'd keep the jewelry in the bedroom. One time the thief is up in the bedroom, he hears the wheels in the driveway. Bayless is back. Bayless puts the scene together in his head, comes to believe that Bryan, knowing has the element of surprise on his side, hides and waits for the veteran to walk towards the back of the house, then sprints out the front and into the woods he knows will protect him. So, I mean, there's something called MO, motive operandus, I believe is what it stands for. And basically what it is that human beings seem to do, they have a pattern or a tendency of doing things. Stalking from the wood line is something that I picked up in this book of what he started to do as a young man. And then he progresses into what he does later in his adulthood, in his late 20s. I think it's just kind of telltale, like the signs are there. Then it fast forwards to 2012, when a tall, thin man and a fat teenage boy enter a boxing gym. So this is when he meets the boxer. And basically all he says here is that his father comes in with his son, Bryan Kohberger, tells him a few things. One of the things that he tells him is that Bryan's had some problems. He's overweight. He's gotten bullied. They had to separate him from Jeremy, who is a guy that Michael Kohberger says was a bad influence on Bryan Kohberger. It's kind of weird. I think it may have been the other way around. But Bryan goes and starts boxing, and he goes one day, the next, and he starts to lean out. He starts, he's there, but he's quiet. He doesn't talk very much. He just kind of sticks to himself. Let's see. But not really much anything there. I mean, this was supposed to be a guy that was going to be testifying for the defense. And I mean, all he could say is that the guy was, kept coming back and forth, or kept coming back to be and trained, and was diligent with his training. So here's where it goes. It goes, Bryan's had trouble in school. He's been bullied. Doesn't like their new house. His friend Jeremy was a bad influence, and they've had to separate them. So now it goes to Effort, Pennsylvania in 2013. So that was 2012. 2013, this one talks with Casey Arndt, who's playing video games with Bryan Kohberger, and she gets a text. She smiles because she likes Bryan Kohberger, apparently. It says here twice that she likes him. I don't know if it's like a romantic like, or if it's just like she likes him as a person. This paragraph talks about it's a little bit controversial because Bryan Kohberger would basically fight with her brother and would get physical out of nowhere, and that he hangs out with Jeremy Saba, who Casey thinks, and this is how they wrote it, is a dick, and Saba is known to be a junkie these days. But she likes Bryan, and in this situation, Bryan asks her for a ride. That he has to go to his cousin's, and he asks for a ride to, where was it? To his cousin's house near Luna Rosa, a restaurant in Broadheadsville. It's about 20-minute drive up Route 209. He doesn't say why. But in here, it talks about that Casey knows Bryan's plans. He graduated high school early in March, and that was online too. And he wants to go to college, maybe in East Stroudsburg University in the fall to study criminal justice. So this is shortly after he has graduated. He is heavily addicted to heroin at this time, and he is considering being a cop. Just kind of doesn't make any sense. You know what I'm saying? But maybe this is the whole, delusion of grandeur that we talk about. Let's see. He tells her that his car's broken down. He has to get his cousin's house near Luna Rosa. So she gets in her car and drives the 3 miles up to the mountain to meet Bryan, who's waiting outside the security gate. She drives him to Luna Rosa. He pops in and out of the restaurant, then asks to swing by CVS quickly because he needs to buy needles for his aunt, who is diabetic. Casey thinks it's a bit weird, shady actually. She gives him the benefit of the doubt. A few days later, he remembers to text her happy birthday. She thanks him, as she always does. But when the next she sees Brandon, he tells her it's common knowledge that Bryan gets heroin at Luna Rosa. That's why he needed Casey to give him a ride back, and that's when he stopped to get the needles at the CVS. Casey feels sick because she obviously figures out that now Bryan Kohberger had heroin in her car. She sends him a text message at 7:49 p.m. on May 21st on Facebook saying, I would like to hand you a big congratulations for lying to me about driving you around. I should have added up beforehand, but thought I was doing something nice for someone, so thank you. If you would have gotten caught, I would have gotten in trouble just for driving you around and not even knowing why. Needles for your aunt? Wow. Oh, great story. Bye. A full day later at 8:33, he responds, I'm in rehab. I know that. Casey writes back. Bryan texts her repeatedly to ask if her parents would let them hang out. And when she doesn't respond, his texts become sadder and less frequent. In early 2014, he tells her to be proud that she's making something of her life. I'm not, ha ha, he writes. March 27, 2014, nearly a year after the car ride to Luna Rosa, he sends a text, I love you guys, always will, even if we stop talking one day. What is Bryan talking about? What does this mean? I mean, it sounds almost like he's trying to harm himself kind of to a certain extent, right? So then it fast forward to 2014, and this is when Michael Kohberger calls the police on his son. He says that his own son is a threat to his family. He can't stop using, which means he can't stop stealing. He has taken Melissa's cell phone and sold it for $200, half of what it's worth. So it goes on to say that Michael closes his eyes briefly, then dials 911. Police arrive, read Bryan his rights, and cuff him. The kid is civil. Brady looks at his dad. He knows who called the cops and why. There's time to be calm and talk to the police politely. Bryan knows that because he's only 16. There's a good chance he'll be expunged. And he'll go again to rehab. Outwardly, he'll be a good, polite son everyone else wants, but inside. So this is, I guess, when he starts to change a little bit. He becomes a good son, so to speak. Very polite, talks quietly, straightforward, doesn't get into, I guess, much trouble, like with the law or anything like that after this. But this goes on to say, alone in his basement, Bryan keeps his true feelings on Tapatalk and SoundCloud, writing records and posting an original rap song made for other sufferers of visual snow. The rage and loneliness just pours out of him. And so, even though has this facade of who he wants to put out there, he still has these Tapatalks and these other sources of where he's releasing, his true feelings. Let's fast forward to 2016. This says Bryan sits in his basement. So, I mean, we're going back to 2014, 2012, actually, going back when he was stealing prescription drugs from his friends and then getting into heroin. I mean, this is several years of usage. So he's out of drugs, he's out of cash, out of friends. His mom is on him to go to Bible study with her. She thinks that'll fix him. So here, Jeremy Saba, he gets a notification that Jeremy Saba has been arrested for DUI and possession of drugs, and he's in jail. So Bryan calls up Connie, who's I guess they were neighbors at one point, and also Jeremy's mom. And Bryan says that she thanks him for what she assumes is a call of condolence and support. Jeremy's mom tells him that she and Jeremy's dad will visit their son tomorrow at the jail at the courthouse. As Bryan hopes the trusting woman shares the time they're planning to go, would Bryan come visit right after? Bryan says yes. But as he ends the call, he might have been forming his real plan. So basically what ends up happening is his friend gets arrested, goes to jail. He calls and says, hey, what time you're going to go over there? I want to go after when you guys get out. And what he does is he goes in there and steals her iPad, her prescription medication, and some jewelry. And so he broke in through the window, and because he lived next door and that he was aware of how to get in and out. She thinks about calling the police, but then she thinks about Bryan's mom. Marianne is a teacher who, like Connie, works in the local school district. And in the past, Marianne has uncharacteristically shared some of Bryan's struggles with her. There was his Asperger's syndrome diagnosis, and later the drugs. She puts the phone away without calling anyone. So Bryan did commit some crimes. He just didn't get caught or didn't get reported. Those were some of the things I think a lot of people were looking at, when they saw his record and say, oh, these Kohbergers are like, whoa, he has no record. He didn't do anything bad. All of a sudden he does this. It's quite not the case. 2018. She hasn't seen him in months, and then she turns and suddenly he is there in the kitchen. He's just there, tall, well over 6 foot, towering over her, eyes budging out, and he is thin. She notices, really, really thin. Bryan, she says, what are you doing here? Even asks if she's questioned, doesn't know the answer because she knows what they teach in rehab. He has come to atone, to make amends. He has come to say sorry for stealing from her. I knew it was you, Connie tells him. There's much more Bryan could say. Then he started working toward a psychology degree at Northampton Community College. He's lonely, he misses Jeremy, but he doesn't say that any of that. He doesn't get the chance. After he's done apologizing, Connie thanks him, and then with much kindness as she can muster, Connie asks Bryan to leave and never to come back to the Saba house. She needs to protect her son from the tall, newly thin former neighbor. Maybe, as he claims, he doesn't do drugs anymore, but somehow she senses that he's still a threat to their family. Very interesting. You know, he was really thin, and, you know, this is already while he was at Northampton. So the drugs were continuing until his college career. I don't think they ever stopped. Center Valley, Pennsylvania, 2018. Bryan's new classmate in psychology program, DeSales University, call him the ghost. There's something spooky about him. Every day he enters the class in the same uniform, wrinkled black long sleeve button down and a tan leather jacket. The long sleeve shirt, typically, you know, if you have somebody that's hooked on heroin, they'll tend to cover their track marks. So I wouldn't be surprised if that's one of the reasons why he has that. In fact, they kind of allude to that when, you know, a little bit later on when he's wearing a jacket in August. After class poof, Bryan back in his car and is gone in a cloud of dust, you know, heads back home. It says here that he has a nighttime security job and any other job he can get. A lab partner, Josh Ferrero, likes how organized Bryan is with their biology project. Josh notices that Bryan becomes less aloof and more animated in psychology soothing, a class taught by Dr. Catherine Ramsland, a famous criminologist. Dr. Ramsland takes her students into a building they call the crime scene house. It's like a theater set where the students pretend that they're detectives and called to investigate a crime. Dr. Ramsland teaches students that killers get tunnel vision when they are committing a murder. That's why the mistakes get made. Amid high adrenaline and hyper-focus of the act itself, killers can forget things they otherwise would not. I'm assuming like a knife sheath. That's one of the things I kept telling people, right? That there's tunnel vision, there's focus, there's a lot of things that are going on here. And that, yes, Bryan Kohberger was smart. Yes, he had some training. Yes, he was in criminal justice, but he was not a robot and he was not perfect. And this kind of alludes to that as well, that these are things that they teach there. Now, also interesting, it says, DeSales students also study criminal profiling where they learn a sort of person chooses what sort of murder weapon. Typically, Ramsland tells them white men choose knives. Goes on to say most of the students expect to go into law enforcement. Bryan is no exception. He texts his friend Jack that he wants to catch high profile offenders. Now, this is that, you know, delusions of grandeur and stuff like that, right? And I've talked about this text message with his friend before, and I said that, hey, you know, when his life started falling apart and he was no longer going to be the cop anymore, there's only a few roles you can play in these high-profile crimes. It's either the cop, the victim, or the suspect. He's not going to be the cop anymore. Doesn't want to be the victim. There's only one left. It goes on to say, Dr. Ramsland says there's a new theory arguing that psychopaths aren't product of socioeconomics and environment alone. Biology has a larger role. The brains of psychopaths are structured and function differently from other people's, which means the only way to cure a psychopath is to get him therapy at the very early stage by around the age of 4 and try to maintain his brain changes. So it says here that Bryan listens carefully and just jots a lot of things down. 2018, this goes on to say, there's an image on the screen and it's mesmerizing. A dark-haired 22-year-old man with movie star looks sits behind the wheel of his black BMW, his head tilted to one side and his face bathed in the reddish glare of the setting California sun. Tomorrow, he says, is the day of retribution. You forced me to suffer all my life. Now I'll make you suffer. His name is Elliot Rodger. He is from a wealthy family. He flies classes and his dad is a well-known movie director. He is still a virgin and he is furious about it. In the video of one of the series he recorded in May 2014, he delivers a message to all the girls who have rejected him. In his apartment, he stabs his 2 roommates, Outside of the Alpha Phi sorority house near the campus of UC Santa Barbara, he fatally shoots 2 women and injures a third. At a local deli, he shoots and kills another young man. Then he drives his sleek black BMW through crowded streets in nearby Isla Vista, shooting indirectly out of the window. He injures 13 more people before crashing his car and committing suicide with a single bullet to the head. Catherine Ramsland explains in her forensic psychology class, Roger had waited. His ultimate act of vengeance was carefully thought out of the result of years of pent-up anger and of his lonely life. He kept a journal outlining his sexual, social frustrations and his various coping mechanisms, video games, late-night drives, trips to the gun range, buying lottery tickets, and a new life in Santa Barbara. So this is very similar to what Bryan Kohberger went through, right? New late-night drives, social, I don't know if he played any video games, but apparently there was some trips to the gun range, and he had a new life in Pullman. None of them gave him sex, girls, or friends he had craved. He intended his final act to be so performative that it would captivate him to global fame. The last words he wrote in his journal was, "Finally, I can show the world my true worth." And I've always thought that that was a part of the motive in this case here. That the reason why Bryan Kohberger didn't care how many cars were outside or if somebody's boyfriend was there, that he wanted to add to the mystery. He wanted it to be a huge case. He wanted it to be a huge unsolved case that he got away with, in my opinion. And so I think that played a huge role in Bryan Kohberger's motive. And it sounds like that was a role in Elliot Rogers' acts as well. He intended his final act to be performative. Roger entitled a 37-page manifesto, My Twisted World. He emailed it to his therapist, who emailed it to his mom just minutes before he began his rampage. Professor Ramsland explains that police need better training to spot telltale signs of potential suicidal mass murderers. One key tool comes from the American Association of Suicidology. Each letter of the acronym is PATH-WARM, represents a warning sign. And these are interesting because Bryan Kohberger, in my opinion, establishes all of them. Ideation, substance abuse, purposefulness, anxiety, trapped, hopelessness, withdrawal, anger, recklessness, and mood change. No one knows about the complaints Bryan texts to Jack Bayless about life on. This is another weird thing. So no one knows about the complaints Bryan texts Jack Bayless about life on Broke Bachelor Mountain. He describes himself as a good Catholic university student, full homo. And that's how it is quoted here, as Bryan Kohberger says. It's pretty weird, right? He calls himself full homo and describes himself as being on Broke Bachelor Mountain. No one knows that, like Roger, Bryan is a virgin who hates women. That was another interesting tidbit here that they found. I know that nobody's been able to find a girlfriend or anybody that has claimed to have been with Bryan Kohberger. I'm not shocked, to be honest with you. But I don't know. I don't know how Pennsylvania is. Yeah, I would have figured this guy probably paid for something, but they claim he's a virgin. No one knows that Bryan copes with loneliness, immersing himself in video games. So apparently he does play video games. Like Rogers, he goes out for late night drives. Like Roger, he visits the gun range. And like Roger, he goes to a local bar and tries to pick up women. And so the next thing they talk about is the time that Bryan Kohberger went to the bar. And it's interesting because he went to a bar and apparently he was like harassing women, asking them where they lived, things of that nature, kind of following them around. And when he was asked, to leave women alone, that there have been complaints, it says here that Bryan feigns astonishment, gives a heck of a performance, almost Broadway level. Chernick will remember and demonstrate it in the future. I don't know what you're talking about, Bryan says. He had me totally confused. Bryan takes another sip of his beer and another. It's like they're playing a game of chicken. Bryan finishes his beer and casually saunters out. So he just sat there looking at him, drinking his beer, saying, "You got me confused." It was more than just like, "Oh my God, no, it couldn't have been me." It was kind of like a stare down, so to speak. All right, let's continue. Chapter 28. This is in 2021. Bryan is immersed in studying for his master's degree, even though he's been stuck at home, working remotely, thanks to COVID. He's doing so well, and one of his professors, Michelle Boger, is recommending him to the PhD program, criminal justice at Washington State University. She's only recommended one other person. Bryan is feeling elated. But soon after, March 21st, his phone pings with the news of Jeremy Saba is dead. So this is interesting because on March 20th, he apparently orders the K-bar knife. So 4 days after his friend's passing, Bryan Kohberger is ordering the K-bar knife, and it's arriving by March 30th. Bryan is away when Jeremy dies, and his parents wanted to keep it away from him until he returned because they knew how hard it would hit him. So even though Jeremy dies on the 16th, his parents kept it from him. I mean, how soon after? I mean, how much later did they tell him? They told him the 18th, the 19th, the 20th, the day that he purchased the K-bar knife, sharpener, and the knife sheath. The last time Bryan's parents saw Jeremy, he'd been doing well. Apparently, Mr. and Miss Kohberger had a run-in with Jeremy and his parents at the Texas Roadhouse. It was a good meeting. Bryan's dad told Jeremy he was proud of him for getting clean. Now, Bryan pounds the table with his fist. He doesn't phone Jeremy's parents. He won't even attend the memorial service for Jeremy or contribute to the memorial page online. And a lot of people have speculated that he died from an overdose. That maybe Bryan Kohberger had something to do with it. I don't know anything about that, but I found it kind of weird that he didn't show up to anything, didn't do anything for his friend that died. The next chapter is about Chief Jenkins, who is the Pullman chief at the time for the WSU Police Department, and he talks about how. Oh wait, hold on. Yeah, talks about how Kohberger in their meeting, he was hyper focused, but nothing else stood out about him, good or bad. He just felt that the guy couldn't build trust. It says here, Bryan packs up his. So this was in April, right? It goes on to say that the chief winds up giving the internship to somebody else. Bryan picks up his gear with his new knife included and gets in his car for a long road trip to the other side of the county. This one even says on here that Elliot Rodger himself gave himself one last chance, planning his day of retribution. He moves cities from LA to Santa Barbara for college. I realized that my miserable, lonely virgin life was going to continue. And my only hope was that Santa Barbara would try. Bryan puts the key in the ignition for one last try. So Rodger lost a friend shortly before he went on his murdering spree. And he had even wrote something to the effect that if his friend was still around. Well, Bryan Kohberger loses a friend, purchases a K-bar knife, right after, and then moves across country. Then they talk about August 2022, and that there was a WSU's famed criminology and criminal justice graduate program has attracted international elite bunch. Talks about the people that they brought in. They had some sort of function. And this is where Ben Roberts, the second oldest guy in the group, he notices Bryan Kohberger. Bryan stands out because he's painfully thin. His eyes move too quickly, and bags under them are too dark and too prominent for someone his age. He notices Bryan never takes off his jacket, even in the August heat. Ben assumes wrongly that he needs insulation on the account of his willowing frame. What he doesn't know is that Bryan has a history of heroin and he's trying to cover his tracks. But what he talks about is that he used to work at TSA, Ben Roberts, and he talked about being in security, and that Bryan Kohberger talked about also being in security at some point, and how they had similarities. However, it's Ben felt like he wasn't being sincere. Like, he talked about a scenario where he had to stop people from going into a certain area, and that the bad part about it was that they had the right paperwork, or they had the right clearance but the wrong paperwork. And so it was embarrassing. And he was like, I know exactly what you mean. And he was like, I don't think this kid was being honest. And so he had kind of noticed that. I want to say real quick, thank you to Natalie. What parent agrees that their son is going on 2,000 miles away? He's been nothing but problems with the inability to function socially. Hearing who he has always been confirms his parents had to have known he committed this crime. It's a good observation. I mean, it's quite possible. Next chapter goes into Pullman, early fall 2022. And it talks about how Bryan Kohberger, this one's interesting. So there was a certain class by Dr. Petterson, and that Bryan Kohberger would sit in a certain position, so that way he would be the first one to be called. And they speculate that he would basically be called first, and then there was a girl that would be called after him, and they reference her as a Becky, which is a name used in the I guess manosphere is what they call it. And in this scenario, he peppers her with questions and theories, try to make her look stupid and stuff. And this one even goes on to say that it says that as soon as she's done, he begins his offensive. He peppers her with questions that he appears to think show how smart he is and how dumb she is. Did she think about this theory? What about that one? And had she read that book? She's getting annoyed. He can see that. Bryan looks over at Ben as if seeking affirmation, but Ben looks away. Some of the women are visibly pissed. Bryan doesn't seem bothered by their discomfort. Elliot Rodger would have been proud. They really go into this Elliot Rodger angle. They may be very well right. Then it goes on, fall 2022. It's been a long day. Bryan is tired. He's sitting back row in the class of Dr. Hillary Mellinger, a recent graduate herself, who teaches a course role on cultural issues like immigration and homelessness and criminal justice. Bryan isn't particularly interested in Dr. Mellinger's course. Incels might consider her another Becky. She's an advocate for immigrant women and girls who are fleeing men perpetrating gender-based violence by knocking them around. In this scenario here, there's a time where she interrupts the class and goes, Bryan, and asks him a question. And he begins to fumble around. It says, this is their words, shit, he doesn't know that one. The Beckys have turned around and started to stare at him. So is Ben, who observed later. You could kind of tell that he was trying to say something, but it wouldn't come out. Couldn't find the words. Dr. Mellinger is shocked. Ben said Bryan looked like a dog caught in the thunderstorm. His ears could have been pinned back. They would have been pinned back. They're just stiff as a board. He didn't move. He didn't speak, just kind of wide-eyed. Unfortunately for Bryan, this happens in the final minute, or fortunately, it happens in the final minute. So he's the last to leave. Nobody can see him mad or anything. So this reminds me of the movie. You guys have seen American Psycho, which I think I've talked about it before. I think Bryan Kohberger has watched that movie. He's probably idolized Patrick Bateman. But in that movie, there's a scene where everybody starts bringing out these business cards. And he's getting really upset because somebody's business card is better than his and things of that nature. Kind of seemed like this was the case. He was in this class. He really didn't care for to be in this class. They asked him a question, caught him off guard, couldn't answer it. And he noticed that the women in the class were staring at him, and it made him mad. It made him mad. All right. The next one is, so this one goes on to page 118 of Elliot Rodger's Manifesto, really kind of diving in, making me think that they think that the 118 page that was underlined in Bryan Kohberger's vehicle was Elliot Rodger's Manifesto. Can't confirm or deny that. I have no idea, but this says on page 118 of the Manifesto, Elliot Rodger wrote, I had nothing to live for but for revenge. I lived in a college town full of young, beautiful, attractive students who partied and had sex all the time. I didn't get to experience any of it. Nobody invited me to any parties. All the times I went out by myself in East La Vista, none of the beautiful blonde girls showed any interest in having sex with me. Not one girl. These are crimes that cannot go unpunished. The more I thought about it, all these injustices that were dealt with, the more eager I became for revenge. Let's see. And then it just kind of goes on that Bryan goes on night drives, and that months later, people in psychology that were physically close to him look for the smallest clues of how it went down. They speculated it happened sometime in August. Bryan goes out for evening drives. He drives and drives in the dark. His drives because he can't sleep. He needs to clear his head, and the nightmares, the visual snow. I mean, some stuff that we were already aware of. Let's see. It says here that he parks his car in town and heads to a place where he reads online about the Mad Greek. They serve vegan pizza, and it goes on to say that Elliot Roger had a childhood friend, and her name was Maddie. And like Elliot's childhood friend Maddie, who grew into someone who ignored Roger, well, she noticed Bryan. So again, they're kind of going into that they believe that Maddie and was the target, and that maybe they met at the Mad Greek. I wonder if we're going to find that out once some of these things are dropped. August 21st, 2022. It's pitch black, but anyone can see Maddie is sitting at her vanity as clear as day through the window. She has no idea who's out there parking lot looking, but neighbors like Lexi Patterson see her nightly routine. And so basically what I wanted to point out is that people that live close could see Maddie inside her bedroom from the back area. She kept her blinds open. They saw her doing her mascara in the morning. They saw a lot of her daily routine from back there. It says here that Corporal Brett Payne of the Moscow police later alleges, based on AT&T cell phone records, Bryan's cell phone made off to the Moscow cell tower that was Bryan. Wait, what? Bryan's cell phone made off a Moscow cell tower. That was what Bryan did. That was weirdly written. Payne alleges that he was there at least 12 times between August 21st and November 13th, always late at night, cloaked in darkness. The theory among Maddie's friends is that she rejected him, so he watched and waiting. Let's see. And then he talks about Elliot Rogers talking about Maddie in his book, in this Manifesto book. Now, if I remember correctly, didn't they say that he had been out there 23 times between July and the week before? I think it was like November 7th. So this is saying between August 21st and November 13th that it's been at least 12 times. So that leaves us 11 times between that first night in July and August 21st. So something happened, and he was there, in my opinion, more frequent between July and August than August and November. And just something that I think obviously happened close to then. Then he talks about Bryan getting pulled over. Now, it says here that 11:37, this is when he gets pulled over. It says he's smooth with the officers, natural. The officer has no clue what Bryan is really doing in Moscow. That's not necessarily true. From what I understood, there was argument and debate and things of that nature, and Bryan got a citation for not using a seatbelt, but he questioned certain things like his phone. So obviously they haven't seen that video, but they're assuming that Bryan was smooth in comparisons also to the other times that he's gotten pulled over. In fall 2022, this goes on to say, this talks about John Snyder. Now, Cassie Handrek is a WSU freshman majoring in psychology, minoring in criminology, our largest class with undergraduate course, criminal justice course with John Snyder. Dr. Snyder is one of the most popular professors in the department. As she sits attentively during Snyder's first class, encounters something off-putting, rather someone off-putting. A tall, thin guy, bulging eyes, stands in front of the class, facing them the entire time. He has a coffee in his hands, and he fiddles with it. Cassie wonders who the heck he is and why he's staring. Finally, Professor Snyder introduces him. This is your new TA, Bryan Kohberger. A couple slides of a nice-looking family come onto the projector screen. Hi, I'm Bryan. He tells the class, I'm here to continue my degree from Pennsylvania. I've got a master's in psychology. Here's my family. They look normal, Casey thinks. Her neighbor whispers to her that the guy is weird. Casey sees Bryan twice a week. Every time she has a class with Professor Snyder, there are two TAs, both of them are guys. Where he's communicative, Casey noticed that in his grading, she can tell he puts a lot of thought into marking his papers and gives her A's and writes a lot of commentary. She assumes that because she's good at writing essays. She doesn't think it's that she's a standout student, though, until she hears from other female students that he's not so generous with their grades. And he thinks that they've gotten something wrong. He writes pages and pages explaining why. And he's tough, they say. They think it's because they're women. Walking to class one time, a group of classmates tell Casey they've emailed Professor Snyder about it. Wow, Casey thinks that's a step. So some women were pretty upset about how how much Bryan Kohberger was writing to them. And it's kind of, I think they use the term mansplaining in certain places. So October 2022, the weather hoovers between fall and winter, is bitterly cold, but the first snow is yet to arrive. That's around 5 p.m. Ben Roberts is smiling around the Wilson Short Hall when he bumps into Bryan, who offered to give him a ride, give him a lift home. Ben hesitates, but he does need a ride, and he's curious. Ben wants to understand what underlines Bryan's antagonistic behavior towards women in class. So makes a decision and accepts. Ben gets into the white Elantra, and Bryan keeps the car interior clean and tidy. The conversation begins straightforward enough with at least Ben's mind. Talk about some of the negative impacts of social media. Ben says he believes that social media encourages people to stay within the bubbles of like-minded people. Dating app searches, for example, Ben points out that they're designed algorithmically to keep men and women in certain groups. Bryan gets personal. Are you seeing anyone, he asks. No, says Ben, and with that, Ben doesn't add something that he doesn't know, Bryan knows, and that is none of his business anyways, but he's not straight. I remember that other comment about, full homo, and now he's asking this guy if he's, I don't know if Bryan has any homosexual tendencies or not. Just a little, possibly, I don't know. All right, let's continue. He wants to change the topic, but Bryan wants to talk about women and what he thinks of them. He tells Ben he believes in traditional gender roles. The implication that their female colleagues are wasting their time in class, have no business in pursuing a master's degree. Ben thinks essentially Bryan believes that men should make the money and women should be homemakers. Ben thinks the sentiment is tasteless as well as anachronistic and odd for someone who's chosen to attend WSU, a progressive academic community where women outnumber men in the faculty, and the department's head is a woman, Dr. Melanie Angela Newelly, who is interested in feminist theories, no less. But Ben is even more horrified by what Bryan says next. I can walk into any social gathering and get any girl I want. Ben doesn't rate himself highly a specimen of physical attractiveness, but this guy talks about his appearance, Bryan Kohberger being not very attractive. He doesn't know that Bryan has in fact seen a girl he wants and cannot get, a beautiful girl with long blonde hair and blue eyes. Bryan continues talking, seemingly looking for a sign of agreement from Ben. They arrive at Ben's place. He gets out of his car, hoping they're done. They're not. Bryan asks to use his bathroom. He lingers in Ben's tiny sardine can studio apartment until 7:45. Both men remain standing in the conversation because Ben has only 2 chairs and one of them is piled high with his stuff. Ben does not consider these hours well spent. Interesting intake, but he talks about how he feels about women for the first time here. Let's see. I got a couple of things I want to talk about. Let's see. Thank you, Midwest, for your 199 super sticker. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. September 23rd, 2022. The way cohort hears it, this is how it goes down for Professor Snyder's office. Snyder calls in Bryan to talk about his complaints. Women have emailed him, the TA, saying that grading female students unfairly. Professor Snyder informs Bryan of what's being said and suggests he changes his ways. Stop interrupting the women, he tells the young man, or he says something else along the lines. They're complaining. Stop writing them essays on their essays. It's offensive. Be generous and brief. A rumor goes around that Snyder makes to the point that the undergraduates cannot expect to have the same level of knowledge as Bryan. Snyder's trying to be helpful. I don't know if that would help him. I think that's kind of, I understand what he's doing, but with somebody like Bryan, I think that might feel like, I don't know, that maybe, I think he can take it the wrong way. Bryan's anger spills out of it. Fuck it. No more point pretending. They deserve what they get, he says. Pretty harsh. The professor sees Bryan might be smart, but his Achilles heel is bigger ego, a high opinion of himself. Professor Snyder thinks he hears Bryan mutter, they don't belong in the classroom. So in his report on the altercation to the higher ups in the faculty, he focuses on what he cannot ignore, the young man's anger. A week or so later, October 3rd, the department chairman, Melanie Angela Newley, and graduate director, Dale Wiltz, called Bryan to discuss his lack of norms of professional behavior. Bryan listens, but he doesn't hear them. He's angry, defiant. He says he wants to meet his critics head on, have a discussion in class, explain his grading. He graded his students poorly because they didn't know the topic well. He leaves the faculty members concerned. There's no way Bryan's decision with his students will likely go in the way he thinks it will. I agree. And in fact, they ended up doing some sort of like deal where they were talking, not just with him, but like they did like a courtroom thing and they had him and it was like a debate. And apparently it didn't go as well. November 2022, Ben Roberts, still in shock about the delusional self-regard Bryan expressed in the conversation, revealed his offensive views on gender roles, but increasingly Bryan's appearance becomes even more startling. Ben assumes that Bryan is stressed. In class, Bryan looks positively ill, like he's physically deteriorating. He looks like he's the walking dead. I mean, we're talking, his eyes were just completely dark most of the time. He just looked gone. There wasn't just sleep deprivation. This was more serious ongoing. Ben goes to WSU Student Care Network and fills out a form indicating his concern. Then looks for the anonymous reporting function. He can't see that his anonymity will be protected for sure. Ben wants to help his exhausted classmate, but doesn't want Bryan searching out or finding out that the person who submitted the form. There's something about this guy that's just too weird. So Ben deletes his typed, never imagining that the act pushing the backspace button on his keyboard will come back to haunt him. What could have, I mean, you can't put that on you, right? I mean, I had a scenario, and I've explained it with you guys before, where I had a young man who lost his life after I pulled him over for for speeding, and then it turned into suspicion of DWI. He passed 2 out of 3 standardized field sobriety tests, so I let him go. He ended up wrapping himself around a pole a week later, drunk, intoxicated, on a motorcycle. And I dealt with that. You know, I was like, man, if I had arrested him, maybe he would have learned his lesson, those type of things. Yeah, same thing with Ben. You can't go back and think about, oh, man, I could have done this. Maybe this would have changed things. I don't know if it would have or wouldn't have, but you can't put that on you. The only person that you can put that on is Bryan Kohberger for committing the act. October 14, 2022, Bryan is driving his 2015 Elantra when he hears a siren. Damn, again, he gets pulled over, sits at WSU. Police officer Isabel Luengas gets out of her cruiser and approaches him. The officer lets him go with a warning. For Bryan, it's likely an empowering moment. Back at DeSales in Professor Ramsden's class, he learned a month before the day of retribution, Elliot Rogers was paid a visit by police officers. They're left with no clue he was planning a mass murder. Is it possible that Bryan, too, can get away with anything he wants? Fall of 2022, she asked Bryan, her neighbor, to install a home surveillance system. So this is the Na Young Ko, story that we heard from Howard Bloom. And it says here, it's like she looks at the camera. So she asked Bryan, because somebody broke into her house, to install some cameras. And I think there's a typo here, because it goes, she looks at the cameras and at what she can see from her phone. There's been a rumor that Bryan followed a woman's student to her car. This technology is smart but simple. Anyone with a password can log in and see the inside of her apartment. I think that whole rumor one was a sentence that's not supposed to be there. But she noticed that anybody that has the password to the cameras, and that she thinks that Bryan Kohberger is one, she changes her. So her mind races. He seemed off lately, strange. He asked her to go out for coffee and seemed mad when she said no. So she did turn him down. He did advance to her at some point, you know, and she turned him down. It goes, he got mad when she said no, really mad. She changes her password. She has no idea. Just 2 months after this, her brief encounter with Bryan will become newspaper worthy. Story that goes viral. So this is probably, if it's 2 months later, this is a week before the murders, because he was arrested 7 weeks after the murders. Chief Jenkins will say the investigators believe that there's likely a connection between Bryan's work on her security and what happened at the 1122 King Road. She has no idea who the weird guy with the bulging eyes really is or what is about to happen. Chapter 41. This is November 2nd, less than a month after the previous meeting, Bryan and his with Bryan. So the cohorts graduate. What? Less than a month after their previous meeting with Bryan. So the cohorts hears graduate director Dale Wiltz and department chair Melanie Angela Newley are once again confronting Bryan about his behavior. There are no friendly suggestions this time. Dr. Willis and Nellie tell Bryan that he already knows, short of a miracle, he'll be fired. So this is before the murders. He's being told that he may get fired. Women later complained to Dr. Snyder and said Bryan had stared at them and that he positioned himself by the door so that they had to get uncomfortably close to him to exit the room. One suggested he followed her to her car. As if Bryan is so pissed they'd be lucky to get close to him, he has stopped showing up to teach. He has stopped showing up to teach. So 2 weeks ago, John Snyder had formally notified Bryan he had failed to meet expectations as a TA. The students assume that Professor Newley wants to give the students the benefit of the doubt, and that's why she and Professor Wiltz are giving Bryan a chance. Today, Doctors Newley and Wiltz suggest an improvement plan for Bryan Kohberger, a way for him to show them that he can lose the misogyny and genuinely behave professionally in an institution that expects that of both students and teachers. This improvement plan, they agree and email to Bryan, and they will meet again in a month to see how it's going. Bryan listens. Bryan's career as a graduate student is over. In this room now, they're just going over the motions. His bubble is bursting. His dream of a new life and new persona is being cut short. Professor Snyder emails the plan to him the next day. It contains words of courtesy and respect, the kind of thing that he considers politically correct BS. So they want change. Then he goes on to say, page 118 of his manifesto, Elliot Rodger wrote that he planned to carry out his day of retribution scheme in November. At first, he planned to do it on Halloween because he said it was the ultimate party night. In the early morning hours of November 13, 2022, police allege Bryan leaves his home in Pullman at 2:47. His phone shows he's moving southeast of Pullman's home. 1 minute later, his phone stops according to the network, or any network, and doesn't come on again until 4:47. Between those time, Corporal Payne alleges that the masked intruder, fitting Kohberger's description, enters 11:22. As they are sleeping or relaxing in what they assume is the safety of their home, Madison Mogen, Kaylee Goncalves, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin are fatally stabbed, and no one knows why. And that is the end of part 2. That is where we're going to stop today, guys. Interesting stuff about Bryan Kohberger's past, in my opinion. You know, it talks a lot about he had a history of breaking into people's homes, watching people, stalking them, watching them from afar. And I think this is clear evidence of escalation, in my opinion. And we found out he's also an incel and a virgin. So is anybody really surprised? Well, guys, I got to get going. I hope you guys like this one. I'll be back tomorrow night. We're going to finish up part 3. It's a longer one, so I might come on a little bit earlier. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. I want to thank everybody that was tuning in. You guys have a safe night. I'll be back tomorrow.